One of the most urgent tasks for our country is to decisively defeat the climate hysteria hoax.
We are in the beginning of a mass extinction.
The ability of CO2 to do the heavy work of creating a climate catastrophe is almost nil at this point.
The price of oil has been artificially elevated to the point of insanity.
That's not how you power a modern industrial system.
The ultimate goal of this renewable energy, plan is to reach the exact same point that we're at now.
You know who's tried that? Germany. 7 straight days of no wind for Germany. Their factories are shutting down.
They really do act like weather didn't happen prior to 1910.
Today is Friday.
That's right, Greta. It is Friday. And I usually follow those words up with the words, this is the best day of the week, but it is not. It is a profoundly sad day. Charlie Kirk was assassinated for speaking his mind on Wednesday. He was a friend of liberty. He was a friend of the Heartland Institute. He was a happy warrior for truth and for the country that he loved. Got to be honest, it's very difficult for us to do this show today. But as we mentioned on yesterday's In the Tank podcast on this channel, we will go on. Free speech and the free exchange of ideas is what Charlie fought for every day of his too short life. Charlie probably did more, actually, to deprogram young people from the climate doomerism that they've been indoctrinated in, maybe more than anybody else in public life, because he brought that message directly to young people on college campuses. And he was of course, bringing conservatism and common sense to yet another big crowd of young people on Wednesday when he was slain. So while our hearts ache right now, we are heartened by Charlie's example, and we will speak the truth today and every day. So God bless you, Charlie Kirk, and may all who pray do so for him in heaven and his family who are suffering here on earth. And let's get started. Today we have with us, as usual, is Anthony Watts. He's a senior fellow at the Heartland Institute and the publisher of the world's most viewed website on climate change. What's up with that? We have Sterling Burnett. He's the director of Heartland's Arthur B. Robinson Center on Climate and Environmental Policy, and Linnea Lueken, research fellow for energy environment policy at Heartland, and also host of yesterday's In the Tank podcast. If you want to watch that, we spent about 90 minutes talking about Charlie Kirk. And thank you, Andy Singer, as our producer behind the scenes, making sure this show looks and flows great. We had planned to have Lois Perry, the director of Heartland UK, on the show with us today. She had to cancel, unfortunately, at the last minute. We will have her on again very soon. I know that there's a lot of fans of hers out there, and we do have quite a sizable audience in the UK. But before we get into the meat of the show and the purpose of the Climate Realism Show, I want to throw it to the group here to share what they're feeling and thinking about this week.
Well, I think I pretty much said my piece for the most part yesterday on the In the Tank show. Nothing has changed since then. I'm still more angry than anything else. And I'm still, kind of processing why it is that, his assassination hit so much harder than something like the assassination attempts on Donald Trump. Now, I don't think it's just because it was successful in the case of Charlie Kirk. I think it's because it shouldn't be expected and it shouldn't be okay in any country at all. But it's almost like more expected for a real figure like Donald Trump, someone who actually is in politics, who is, a presidential candidate at the time or president, to be attacked like that. But it's absolutely appalling that the nicest guy in conservative activism and commentary took the bullet. It feels like for all of us. And so, yeah, I'm going to stop there because I'm going to start crying again. And we don't need crying on the Climate Realism Show.
Yeah, I share your thoughts Linnea. It's been a really rough week for me on a lot of different levels. And I should say to everybody who's watching, the What's Up with That website is in trouble at the moment. Technically, we got some problems from the new changeover, but also we discovered today that we are being attacked by China with a denial of service attack. So we're working on that. But Charlie's death hit me like a gut punch. And it put me into task paralysis this week, trying to get things done. My mind kept going in different ways. And it was just really bizarre. That's all I can say about it. It affected not just me, but a lot of my friends, and a lot of people just simply have decided to get off of social media for a while. I did that too. My Facebook feed was filled with so much irrational hate. I couldn't believe it. How could people act like this? I mean, you're cheering for the death of someone that you disagree with. How low can you go? It's just been mind-boggling, and I'm really appreciative of law enforcement that they captured this man. And I'm shocked but not surprised at what he had written on the cartridges and so forth. What's going on in our colleges is this radicalization of normal people. You know, you come in as a freshman, you know, you've had a good life with your parents or whatever, you're a normal kid. And by the time you get out, you're this crazy radical who hates America, hates freedom, hates opportunity. And I think that's what happened to this poor guy. I mean, I don't have any sympathy for him, but Charlie was there to try to prevent this stuff. And he was super effective at it. And then he was killed for it. And it's just shocking, saddening. And like I say, it feels like a gut punch.
I probably knew less about Charlie Kirk than anyone on this show. I've seen some of his videos. I have watched him on the news. But I had no personal connection. I thought he was doing a great job in the sense of he engaged in debate. He let himself be open to questions. To some extent, he was practicing the Socratic method, questioning. As a trained philosopher, that's what we're supposed to do, is debate and discuss. Now, we lost a great voice for that. And I guess I have sorrow for the loss, for him, for his family, which I just think, that was terrible. For myself, though, of the 7 deadly sins, the one I probably struggle with the most is wrath. And that has not been helped this week. I have struggled to contain my deep anger and not let it be turned into hate. And when I see teachers, professors, employees of even the government saying the awful things that they've said, and then when they're being called to carpet for it, I think not fast enough. I don't know why school districts have to investigate. These people are shaping our young kids' minds. I keep hearing people on the left saying, "Oh, you always believe in free speech. You believe in free speech. Now you want to shut these guys down." No, free speech isn't free. Charlie's proof of that. Our military wars are proof of that. And guess what? If you are acting in a public sphere in a way that would undermine people's trust in you, especially trust in your ability to steward our children or to educate or operate fairly in government, then say whatever you want on Facebook or TikTok or X, but don't be surprised and don't complain when you get fired. Because free speech isn't free, and you are in a position of trust, and you've shown yourself to be untrustworthy.
Yeah.
Sorry, I can't be more eloquent than that.
Yeah. Well, we're I just want to say one more thing. I mean, I shared this with everyone on this show today and other people at the Heartland Institute, a tweet I came across from Chad Prather. I'm not going to read the whole thing, but I saw that this morning and it helped put this into context. And he says, the reason you feel Charlie's death so deeply is because grief doesn't measure itself by proximity. It measures itself by meaning. You didn't have to know Charlie personally to feel the sting of his absence, because when a voice like his goes silent, something in the atmosphere shifts. And I think that's spot on, and why the assassination of Charlie Kirk has hit so many people a lot harder than they may have imagined. I mean, you know, I'm not going to sit here and say that Charlie and I were friends. We were acquaintances. The Heartland Institute was a really big help in getting Turning Point USA started. We provided materials for them that they put on tables for college kids. And Charlie used to take pictures of them on the tables and the kids smiling, holding up things like Why Scientists Disagree on Global Warming and other publications of the Heartland Institute. But he grew that organization so fast and so large and became literally one of the leading voices for conservatism, for love of country, and for common sense in this country. And he was cut down for it. But he lived his life and he died for free speech. And so I would something we talked about on yesterday's program, now is the time to be even more determined to speak your mind and to not self-censor and to say the truths that you know in your heart are real and true. And so that is at heart the theme of this program, and what the Heartland Institute and the fans of this program and everybody on it have done for years and years, and will continue to do it. And we will do it starting our show off right now by covering the climate news of the week. Now, usually, because we like to have a lot of fun on this show, and we often do, we usually have a drop of Bill Nye burning a globe, and you know, I just don't feel quite that mirthful today. So Bill Nye, you're going to get the week off. We'll see you next week maybe, but we can get into covering some very important news stories in climate this week, and so we will do that. One of them was from Anthony Watts alerted us to this week, and this is a story we have covered on this program quite a bit, and that is the Climate Working Group from the Department of Energy. Well, that's been disbanded. And the headline at What's Up With That is DOE's Climate Working Group, born, attacked, and buried in less than a year. Now, this is the Climate Working Group, if you remember, or if you hadn't seen our previous shows, was the group of 5 scientists that Energy Secretary Chris Wright hand-selected to produce the only report in the last decade or two on the climate that looked at the data and presented the actual facts and did not distort itself to adhere to an alarmist climate narrative in which humans are responsible for all sorts of bad things. Anyway, I'll read a little bit here from Anthony's post. So Roger Pelkey Jr. has just reported that the Department of Energy's short-lived Climate Working Group has been shut down. On September 3rd, the group was quietly disbanded, its work halted, and its draft reports destined for the shredder. The official reason? A lawsuit filed by the Environmental Defense Fund and the Union of Concerned Scientists, claiming that the Climate Working Group violated the Federal Advisory Committee Act. It turns out that the DOE fumbled a paperwork technicality. One member of the group had not filed the proper forms to be considered internal, which meant that the lawsuit against them had teeth. Rather than fix the oversight or defend the group, DOE folded. This is bureaucratic sloppiness at its finest, said Anthony Watts. And then I just want to read one more thing. This is from Roger Pelkey Jr. himself, who, by the way, I think is going to be testifying before Congress with our friend Chris Martz next week. That's pretty exciting. Anyway, Roger Pelkey wrote for his part on his Substack, the most important accomplishment of the short-lived working group was to reveal the censorious and politicized response of many in the media and climate science community to the very idea that other accomplished and credentialed experts might have views that deviate in small or large degree from an acceptable orthodoxy, all in the context of climate politics. Responses to the climate working group were often expressed with expletives, impersonal terms, and focused on the alleged political and financial motivations of members of the climate working group. Now, Anthony, I know you're a little hot about this. You're just kind of gobsmacked about how this could have happened. So how could this have happened? And what do you think happens next?
Well, I would just go to the point of government itself is the fault of this. I mean, just take a simple example like the DMV. There are people that are just absolutely unable to navigate the DMV because they've made everything so complex. It's the same thing with the tax code. A lot of people can't file their own taxes, particularly if they own a business, because it's become so complex. And I would imagine, although I haven't seen the forms and the process, that the same kind of thing here is true. There's all these things, these check boxes that you have to do, and they're written in GovSpeak in such a way that nothing makes any sense. And so for an average person or maybe a newbie to the department, you look at this and and you think you've done it right, but you've got no clue whether you have or not because the GovSpeak is so obtuse. And I think that's what happened here in this case. We had new people in this department, and they were unfamiliar with the process, and the process itself was not clear because government overcomplexifies everything.
I think that maybe it's not even the new people in the department. It's certainly the people involved. At least a couple of them have served on federal advisory committees before. We don't know who didn't get the paperwork in properly. But I would say that if you know what's going on in DC, you know that a lot of the people are not in position for the Trump administration, that Congress, the Democrats, have held up lower appointments. And they may be breaking the Senate rules soon, changing the Senate rules to stop that. So there were probably people in place at DOE that were serving in positions that they wouldn't be serving in, and they're career bureaucrats. So they may have messed this up intentionally. There's some evidence that they may have leaked the fact that certain things weren't done properly. I've had one person say, well, they shouldn't have gone through the Federal Advisory Committee Act. If they weren't employees, so they should have had to comply with that. But what's most important, I think that the article that's the jumping off point for this, as opposed to, what's the actual jumping off point, which is the problems with the committee and it being over now, is two things. So first, the DOE is not trashing the report itself, and it's not distancing itself from the report itself. It says it will continue to use the report. They can use any damn report they want to use. They don't have to check with environmentalists to determine which reports they want to use. So Chris Wright said, we're keeping the DOE report and we're going to use it. The makeup, whether the committee filed paperwork right has nothing to do with the substance of the report. So in addition, at least some of the committee members had said, yeah, we're no longer an official committee, but guess what? The report is out for comments. We're still working, and we'll work in our private capacity to respond to comments and to modify the report if the DOE allows us. So that gives me hope.
You're muted, Jim.
Jim pulled a Jim.
Jim pulls a Jim. Now that'll bring a smile to everybody's face. All right. Well,
if too many Jims are pulled in the show becomes like a black hole and it just collapses and goes dark.
Collapses upon itself. Yeah. Anyway, I was trying to say that Steve Malloy, who was on this program last week, has warned about this actually privately, and I think also on the show. He said, like you just said, Sterling, he said there doesn't need to be any report to justify the scuttling of the endangerment finding. But by even producing this report, they opened themselves up to legal challenges, even on little technicalities. And is it true, perhaps, that now the Trump administration is stuck because they opened this avenue of resistance through this report at all?
I don't think so, because the report can stand on its own regardless of who wrote it. If it had been written by 5 people that didn't have anything to do with DOE could use it. if it was written by people that didn't file a paperwork, it doesn't matter. The paper itself stands. They don't have to disavow it. The DOE can get a report from anyone they want.
Yeah.
And they can cite a report from anyone they want.
All right. Well, I guess tell it to the
law
judge.
that says DOE must only use reports from people, who have filed paperwork with the federal government. No, they use papers all the time that are written by outside people or people who got government funding through the university. The report stands, and there's no reason to disavow it. It's the committee that is now, as an official committee, disbanded. And I think in the end, that will be about as far as it goes.
All right.
The report is not the report, for instance, is not the driving force behind the endangerment finding that they're reconsidering.
Yeah. Well, I guess we shall see. So we'll keep an eye on that story. It's disappointing, but perhaps not all is lost there. All right, let's move on to our second item. I've titled this "Leave the Poles Alone." No, I'm not talking about the Polish people. Oh, that's probably good advice. I'm talking about the poles of the Earth. And so this comes from Bloomberg. Scientists warn against plans to artificially cool polar regions. I'll read a little bit from this. Proposals to artificially cool the world's polar regions to stem the impact of global warming are both expensive, unfeasible, and potentially dangerous, according to new scientific research. You don't say. The Arctic and Antarctic are warming faster than the rest of the world, this story claims, which has led some think tanks and entrepreneurs to propose large-scale technological innovations. But those ideas, including spraying reflective particles high into the atmosphere to reflect sunlight, erecting sea curtains to block warm water from melting glaciers, and sending oceans and seeding oceans with nutrients to boost the growth of carbon-absorbing algae, aren't workable and could irreversibly damage polar regions, according to a paper published Tuesday in the journal Frontiers in Science. The panel of judges said this matter didn't even belong. What am I talking about? That's that was from last week. So that's where that is, Sterling. Apologies for that. We've seen these kinds of schemes in the past, Sterling, to geoengineer this. I think at least half of them come out of Bill Gates's mouth. But I guess maybe since we see a report in a peer-reviewed journal that says perhaps tap the brakes on this a little bit, maybe reality is starting to seep into the brains of the scientific community, and they're having a little bit of humility.
Well, maybe, but I'm not convinced that all the things that they described are necessarily bad things. I would say this. First off, the report gets at least one real fact wrong. Now, climate models say the poles should be warming faster than the rest of the globe. That's true. That's what the models say. And the Arctic is warming faster than the rest of the globe, but not Antarctica. That's just false. It's not warming faster than the rest of the globe. And it's adding ice and it's adding snow. And when it has warmed on the coast, it's due to ocean currents. So that's just wrong. Second, a lot of these proposals are idiotic. None of them, as far as I can tell, will have any influence on future warming or temperatures. If we could block soot from falling on ice, that might help a bit. If we could put a stopper in subsurface thermal vents and volcanoes in Antarctica, that might help a bit, but we can't do that. But the one thing that I thought wasn't an idiotic idea, even though they described it wrong, is putting minerals, or at least iron filings, in the oceans. The proposal that I've seen for more than a decade, they've done some test cases, is to drop iron filings in the dead spots of the oceans where there isn't life, where the food chain doesn't exist. The food chain starts the life. And what it doesn't start algae, it starts phytoplankton and plankton, which things then feed upon. then they have young, and it starts the life chain in these areas of the ocean that historically don't carry a lot of life or are nutrient poor. I see no downside to making parts of the ocean that are nutrient poor, nutrient rich, and improving sea life and fish stocks. That doesn't have anything to do with the poles. It's dead spots in the ocean. Typically, they're pretty far away from the poles. So that's my thought.
All right.
Yeah, I mean that kind of thing, to anybody who's ever, managed a stock pond or something, that that's a very small example, but like, making a property better or making an area better for life isn't automatically bad. But my issue with this stuff is I don't trust the motivations of any of these people, and I also don't trust their caution.
Yeah, their know-how.
Yeah, it's crazy about the whole geoengineering thing. We've got people that believe that chemtrails are geoengineering, and in a small way they are, because they're blocking out sunlight at the high elevations of our atmosphere, because the crystals are reflecting. But, the whole idea of geoengineering is just, it's dangerous, first of all. The law of unintended consequences in a super complex system like climate, you just don't know what's going to happen when you start messing with it. And so, geoengineering, from my perspective, is a total dead end, but it keeps popping up again and again and again.
Anthony, you meant contrails, not chemtrails, correct?
That's, of course, what I meant, because there is no such thing as chemtrails. They are a fiction of people's overwrought imagination, much like some of the stuff that liberals believe. And yeah, there
Jim,
are no
what have you
chemtrails.
done?
I know. What have I done? Yeah. Well, a little slip of the tongue. You triggered yourself. Way to go, Anthony. All right. Yeah.
Anyway.
I mean, it's just, the idea, look, it all goes into the hubris of man here. I think ultimately that we know that we're smart enough to figure out the exact ways to change the climate of the earth in precisely the way that we want to, and with no unintended consequences or even chance of failure, I suppose. But they should make movies about that instead of things like Day After Tomorrow. Just saying. All right.
Yeah, which is totally wrong. That do not use the Day After Tomorrow for any reference, any place, anyhow. It's just wrong.
That was the best comedy of the year that year when it came out. So I don't know what you guys are talking about. All right, let's move on to.
This is a good point from Nuts Bolts. Sorry, Jim. I want to point it out though, and that's they only come up with these daft ideas because they get taxpayer funding. Trump has to stop it, and that's true. I think that's true 100%. If there wasn't the climate funding brigade, if there wasn't this big culture of making sure that every little idea that ties to climate gets funded and gets published, you wouldn't see half as much of this stuff.
Indeed. Yep. Hopefully that's going to be happening. We'll keep an eye on that as well for you guys in the audience. All right. And the title of our third item today made me smile in a week where smiling is very difficult. And we're going to talk about a climate sweet tea emergency, which is a phrase thanks to Linnea Lueken in Kicking Stories Around this week. This comes from the Associated Press and Anthony Watts's favorite reporter, Seth Borenstein. Headline is, as world gets hotter, Americans are turning to more sugar, study finds. Global warming in the United States is amping up the country's sweet tooth, a new study found. When the temperature rises, Americans, especially those with less money and education, drink lots more sugary beverages and a bit more frozen desserts. It amounts to more than 100 million pounds of added sugar consumed in a year compared to 15 years earlier, according to a team of researchers in the United States and United Kingdom writing in Monday's journal Nature Climate Change. Quote, climate change is shaping what you eat and how you eat, and that might have a bad effect on your health, said study co-author Duo Chan, a climate scientist at the University of Southampton. Quote, people tend to take in more sweetened beverages as the temperature is getting higher and higher, Chan said. Obviously, under a warming climate, that would cause you to drink more and take in more sugar. And that is going to be a severe problem when it comes to health. Lustig wrote in an email that among poorer Americans, just one added can of sugary soft drink per day increases diabetes risk by 29%, and temperature-related thirst plays a big part in America's obesity epidemic. So if that's true, I'm in big trouble. I'm always grabbing an extra can of Coke. You know, I try going to those 10-ounce cans of Coke, those little minis, and I end up drinking 2 of them instead of 1 12-ounce. So it's not working on me.
Well, the question
anyway, yeah, go ahead, guys.
The question is, how do you know it's an extra can of Coke, that you wouldn't have had it absent that? And it's nice to know that I can now claim, climate change for my diabetes, despite the fact that I don't drink sugared canned soft drinks. But A, there are non-sugary treats. B, there are all sorts of drinks. C, what we know is soft drink consumption is down. So the earth is warming and soft drink consumption is down. So it can't be causing more people drinking more sugary treats. It's just factually wrong.
Yeah.
What?
Exactly. And Sterling, you know what they're not paying any attention to? They're not paying any attention to the fact that marketing is pushing soft drinks and energy drinks like crazy. And that marketing has accelerated.
But I don't care about that. I mean, people have free will. They can say no. They have something called water at the tap if they don't want to drink bottled water. If they're outside, they could drink sugar-free Gatorade or all sorts of things. But my point is, they factually say people are drinking more soft drinks, and the fact is they're not. And there's no evidence that even if they were, heat has some kind of effect on our biology to drink sugar. I've never seen that biological connection in your brain. Ooh, it's hot, I must drink more sugar. If anything, I'd be more prone to drink sugary treats during the winter when it's cold and I want more calories to shiver and keep myself warm. But regardless, they at least ought to look at the data as to whether people are actually consuming more drinks, soft drinks, before they put out some crap like this.
I said on X the other day that I need funding for a counter study that is going to look at the decline in hot chocolate consumption as global warming destroys winter. And Swiss Miss most affected. we're not going to see like marshmallow sales anymore because of climate change. And I would like it to be compared to the increase in sugar consumption in the summer, and see if that has any effect whatsoever. But anyway, this is just one of those like projection fanaticism things, right? Where people do more of a thing in these conditions, therefore it will continue to increase exponentially throughout all of time, when that's just not how human beings act. It's so like robotic. It's a bizarre little study, and it's very short too. So I feel like it was just produced for headlines, and because they wanted to produce something, it's worthless. It's a garbage little study.
In private exchanges between Anthony and myself, and I think some of the others, he's pointed out in the past that this is even if it's true, in the sense of people are drinking that extra can of Coke during the summer on a summer day than they would normally. That's causation. That's correlation, not causation. We know that shark attacks go up in the summer, but no one claims that that's because and ice cream sales, shark attacks and ice cream sales both go up in the summer, but no one claims that shark attacks are causing the sale of more ice cream, or the sale of more ice cream is causing more shark attacks. It's stupid. It's just bad science.
Well, if some government-funded scientist wants to begin a study on the global warming's effect on beer consumption, I hereby volunteer. And as long as the government picks up the tab, Anthony, you're another volunteer. I know somebody in our audience did. That was
I
very
can be a
funny.
lab
Sadly-
rat for that.
Sadly, I had to give up beer consumption because of the diabetes, but the doctor told me I could drink all the whiskey I wanted to. So I will add an extra highball every day during the summer just to.
Yeah, I never get asked to participate in the really good studies. So I'm just laying it out there. We know that some scientists watch this. Heck, if you just put global warming on it, you can, I can get all the beer I can drink. So maybe we can make that happen. All right.
Yeah, everything's better with global warming on it.
That is true. You got to be a certain age to know that jingle. That's all I'm going to say. I doubt Linnea knows what you just sung. All right. All right, let's move on to our main topic. And again, we had hoped to have Lois Perry, the director of Heartland UK, on the program today. They had a very important event and gathering of Reform Party UK in London last week. Heartland Institute President James Taylor was there. Nigel Farage was there. Lois Perry was there. James gave a presentation on climate to the party members. It was very well received, and we know it was very well received because we saw some hit pieces about the event and the Heartland Institute, both U.S. and U.K. in the media. So that's how you know it's successful every time. So, but on top of that, and hopefully we'll have Lois and/or James on here to talk about it on a future broadcast. But one of the other hooks for our main topic today is that Brits are cooling on global warming is a new poll that we found from The Sun, and the headline here on this story is "Number of Brits skeptical of global warming soar by 50%. New poll reveals." So this is fantastic news for this program. I'll read some of it here. Another part of it says that a part of the same poll shows that Labour's green initiatives are not popular with the public. That was the subhead on the article. So here we go. The number of Brits who think the dangers of global warming are trumped up has soared 50% in 4 years. Research shows 1 in 4 voters believe fears about climate change are over-egged. Love that phrase. With the cost of net zero policies to blame. Another 16% think global warming is not the result of human activity, compared to 11% in 2021. A survey by The Times also found that 1 in 3 people are in favor of banning new petrol and diesel cars, which you think is bad, but that's compared to 51% who held that view in 2021. And in a huge blow to Energy Secretary Ed Miliband, only 16% of voters said they would be prepared to pay higher gas bills to encourage the switch to electricity. Professor Wouter Portinga of Cardiff University told The Times, quote, "Climate change is being politicized in the same way it has been done in the United States." Oh, my Lord. Tory leader Kemi Badenoch said the poll showed plans to reach net zero emissions by 2050 will not work. Quote, "Keir Starmer is living in a fantasy land while families pay the price. That is why I have said plainly, net zero in its current form is impossible," unquote. And I'll finish up here. Energy Secretary Ed Miliband apparently has his head buried in the sand, or maybe somewhere closer to his midsection. He says, quote, "The message from the majority of the British people is loud and clear. They want action from government to bring down energy bills with clean, homegrown power, to invest in good jobs in our communities, and to protect our way of life for our children and grandchildren. That is why this government is delivering our clean energy mission, so we can get our country off the fossil fuel roller coaster to give us energy security, bring down bills for good, and create jobs." So, like I said, his head may actually be not in the sand, but somewhere more personal. Guys, this is pretty. Lois was going to be going crazy about how wonderful this news is, but I think it really is, and a theme on this program for many years is that a lot of the narrative about climate change, when it smacks itself right into reality, as they say in the United States, when the rubber hits the road, you can't avoid reality. And the reality is that the net zero is impossible, and that these so-called green energy schemes are making it almost unaffordable to heat and cool and electrify your home.
You can't avoid reality, but you can lie about reality. And that's what people like Miliband and Starmer are doing. They are telling you, as your energy prices go up, that green energy will bring your prices down. They're adding more green energy to the system. Your prices are going up accordingly directly because of that. And yet they're telling you, ignore your bills, ignore what you see, believe what we say. They're telling you the people want this. The polls say not so much. And that goes on over here as well, less so. But they've been on this. Look, their bills should be net zero at this stage. Their power bills, because they've been doing this for 35 years. They say, oh, we want homegrown energy. Well, they got something called the North Sea where they get a lot of oil, and they had natural gas, but they banned fracking. That's homegrown. And it doesn't depend on rare earth minerals from China and technology shipped in from China. They may be assembled in England, but they ain't constructed there. They aren't manufactured there. And they're destroying their environment in the process. Studies have shown a lot of microplastics and pollution are coming from these wind towers. Now it turns out they're putting chemicals into the sea. And in the end, the bottom line is, if they continue down the same path that they're continuing, it's just, I think it was Albert Einstein, the definition of madness is doing the same thing over and over again, expecting a different result. Their prices will continue to soar, and they will continue to have shortfalls, and people will not be able to pay their power bills, and the government will blame not their policies, but the greed of private industries or our continued reliance on fossil fuels. If we'd only get to net zero, it would all be cheap. It's the same thing they said about nuclear. I like nuclear. It's reliable. It lasts a long time, but it is not too cheap to meter as they promised, and neither is wind and solar.
Well, I mean, I guess for me, what's frustrating about this is I am, I don't mean to be insulting to our friends across the pond, but man, are your politicians just feckless and cowards. I can't handle it. Every time they're so wishy-washy. It's like every other day I see one or the other of them saying the opposite of what they said the day prior on live television. And it's hard to pin them down except with cowardice. That's all I can think of. They get any kind of like public pushback on any subject and they instantly start saying the opposite. Even if their policies don't change.
That's the thing. Their policies don't change. They wake up in the morning and they lick their finger and they stick it up to check the wind, which way the winds are blowing. And they say, okay, this is what I got to say today, but I'm going to continue down the same path. And so in one sense, they're feckless, I guess. In another sense, they're just, they're committed. They are in the grips of a theory, in the grips of a belief that they can't get out of. They believe climate change is going to destroy them, and they believe these technologies will save them, and no evidence to the contrary can enter into their view because of the blinders they have on.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's good news. I mean, as I said, the coverage of Heartland UK Europe and its focus really, it's not just on climate. It's on freedom and free markets and conservatism in Great Britain, but it's having an effect. It's already a very powerful and influential organization. I mean, giving climate presentations to Reform Party UK, which is on the rise. Nigel Farage may very well be the next Prime Minister of Great Britain. I don't know that much about British politics, but I know that the party leader gets to be PM. So we shall see. And it's a credit to Lois and to all of the voices of sanity and climate realism around the world that this movement is growing and the polls are starting to show it. Again, when reality hits you in the face with looking at an energy bill that's been triple what it was a year ago or 2 years ago, your mind is open to the truth. because you literally cannot afford to indulge in fantasies and nonsense about the climate. It's a little off script. I wanted to bring up a story. I shared it in the private chat there, Andy. So you can bring it up. Sterling, right before he went on air, wanted to share some good news. And this is that the U.S. Treasury-led watchdog dismantles climate advisory panels. So it says here, real quickly, U.S. financial regulators voted on Wednesday to disband 2 committees charged with monitoring financial risks brought on by climate change, ending a multi-year Biden administration effort to embed climate threats into financial regulations. So the committees were set up by Bessent's, that's the Treasury Secretary, Scott Bessent's predecessor, Janet Yellen, and she would warn repeatedly that increasingly severe storms, wildfires, and other climate events were causing large economic and financial impacts on the U.S. economy and could trigger destabilizing asset losses. Bessent said that this dismantling was part of his back-to-basics approach for financial regulation, meant to remove burdensome rules and ease capital requirements for banks and other lenders to unlock more economic growth. Guys, this is indeed good news, because one of the things that the climate alarmist industrial complex has been able to do is to weave climate alarmism into and climate impacts into literally every aspect of our economy and government policy. And this administration, and it's nonsense, it's not scientifically legitimate to do that. And this administration is pulling those weeds out by hand. It's going to take a while, but this is fantastic news.
It's not legally legitimate either. I mean, every time I see an agency dip into the climate realm, I go check. When were they founded? What was their charter? What is their mission? Guess what mission is not mentioned in the Department of Treasury's documents? Fighting climate change. They are to, they control the currency. They have a couple of policing powers related to taxes. The Treasury, the taxes go to them. And they're to set regulations for banks. But the regulations for banks are supposed to be about fiscal soundness. It's not supposed to be about making sure banks toe the climate line and take climate change seriously. Look, bankers aren't stupid. If they think it's a bad idea to loan money on beachfront property, then they won't loan money on beachfront property. If they think it's a bad idea to loan money into areas that are prone to wildfires, then they won't do that, or they'll charge higher interest rates and reap the rewards. In the end, they have insurance, but there's no evidence that climate change is making hurricanes worse, that climate change is making wildfires worse, that climate change is making tornadoes worse. And so for Yellen, as she did, to try and weave climate change into their considerations, and in fact, force them basically to be adherents to their environment, social, and governance goals of the government, that was wrong as a matter of policy and illegal as a matter of law.
Yeah, we've known for a long time that the goal has been to use climate change as a way to scare people into action. And we see that every day with the way the news stories come out. The Associated Press does this on a daily basis. Many other news outlets do this on a daily basis. They take some single study, about sea level rise or ice at the Arctic or Antarctica, whatever it might be, polar bears, penguins, and then they turn that into something scary, with the undertone of you must act now to prevent this sort of thing. And that's why some people believe that we are, we're on a path to destruction of the planet. Because they've been told this again and again and again, and they uncritically trust the media.
I want to highlight this comment by a viewer I have not seen in our chat before, so welcome if you are new, who's crypto, who says, the tax on carbon is the most insidious form of slavery devised. It's a tax on all life that has ever existed, all life that is extant today, and all life that will exist in the future. That's spot on.
Yep.
Bravo. Very good. Thank you.
Yes.
Yes. Thank you for being part of our show.
Do appreciate that for sure. All right. We're going to get into what I think is the audience's favorite part of the show, which is the Q&A. But before we do that, I have to read something, and we have to thank our sponsors who help us keep this show going. And so your attention, please, here. Every week here on the Climate Realism Show, we shine a spotlight on the reckless, radical climate policies that drive up energy prices, threaten the hard jobs, and erode the economic security of hardworking Americans. Our mission here is to push back, armed with facts, against the runaway net zero agenda and the politicians who seem much more interested in virtue signaling than protecting your bottom line. And so we fight for your interests here in the United States, in Washington, D.C., in the media, and right here on this show, because you deserve the truth about what these policies really cost. But there is another threat you face that doesn't make the headlines every night, and that is inflation. And so when the Federal Reserve targets 3% inflation year after year, it might not sound like much, but that 3% loss compounds on itself, quietly eroding what your money can buy. And that is why we have partnered with Advisor Metals here at the Climate Realism Show. And they are our first sponsor. And like us, Advisor Metals believes in protecting what you've worked really hard for. They make it simple to own physical gold and silver and other precious metals, real assets that you can hold in your hand, not just promises on a piece of paper. It's a proven way to hedge against inflation and unpredictable policies coming out of Washington, D.C. So if you want straightforward answers and real options, please go to climaterealismshow.com/metals. Just drop your name, email, or phone, and Ira Brashatsky or one of his team members will reach out to you directly. You're going to get no robocalls, no hard sell. And be sure to tell them that the Climate Realism Show sent you so you can keep your savings as resilient as your climate skepticism. Again, that is climaterealismshow.com/metals. Take action today to protect your future, preserve your wealth for your family, and shield yourself from the unpredictable nature of politics. That's climaterealismshow.com/metals. All right. Thank you very much for your attention to this matter. Let's move on to Q&A. Linnea, please take it away.
Alrighty. Cool. So we're going to jump right into it here. Here's a question from Redneck Screwloose who says, we are being confronted by pure evil without morality or ethics. How do we resist without stooping to their level?
That is the question of the century. It really is. You know, that's it. Stooping to their levels often is something that we don't want to do, you know, because we project from morality, you know, we have morals, we have scruples. The left in many cases does not. So how do you fight that? And, you know, Charlie Kirk was doing that at a base level. He was trying to reach people by educating them, by showing them, you know, live that their ideas did not hold water. And he was very effective at it. And I think that's what we try to do every day on climaterealism.com, you know, climateataglance.com, this show. We try to, but the problem is a lot of people will not watch this stuff or read this stuff. You know, they are told, oh, those are climate deniers. Don't read that stuff. It's dangerous, you know, and they believe that. So how do you reach people like that? Well, Charlie basically did it by an in-your-face process at campuses. And maybe people will take up that mantle and multiply that effect, because it's not going to go away overnight. This is something that has been generationally ingrained, you know, and we have to have a complete upheaval of our education system, an upheaval of the way college campuses are run and so forth and so on, in order for our younger generation to not be brainwashed and radicalized into believing these sort of things.
Yeah, I think you have to work on some, I mean, it's just, for most of us, it's going to be up to your personal discernment as to whether or not something is stooping or just playing by the same rules or whatever it happens to be. I mean, in the case of people, you know, contacting the employers of people they see on Facebook, saying awful things about the assassination of Charlie Kirk, I would say that that's fair play. Because these people, the kind of people who would say this sort of thing, should not expect that they'll never be held to account for this kind of thing. And it's been, I think, way too long. And I said this on the show yesterday, but conservatives for too long have been the ones who always just say, you know, don't worry about it. I have a crazy coworker who says that Charlie Kirk deserved what he got. I'm going to ignore it because, I don't want to rock the boat. I don't want to make people uncomfortable, whatever it happens to be. But it only got to this point because people think that this is okay to have that kind of expression towards your political enemies or, people who disagree with you. So I don't think we're at a point anymore where we can afford to just ignore it when people are advocating for violence or celebrating violence in that way. So I think, and that's a difficult position to come to. And it is, it's a lot up to personal discernment, I think.
Well,
Good
I've
point.
already said free speech isn't free. When I see these groups like this week happened, say with Trump and some of his administration at a restaurant, when they are shouting and trying to get him kicked out and disrupting the restaurant itself, that's not speech, that's action. Maybe they want to call it political theater, but that's action. You're on somebody's private property. You are disrupting a private event. You don't have the right to do that. B, if people want to film their faces and then say, look at this person and show it to their employers, I think that's fair game. And I'll tell you why. Their employers, most companies don't give a whit about your politics. They want to sell you a product or service. And if you are out there as their employee, being their employee, not as their employee, but being their employee, and you're out there demeaning half of their potential customer base, then you got to go. I can't afford to have employees out there telling half the people I want to sell products and services to, we don't like you. We hope you die. We hope you're locked up. If you're doing that and you work for me, you got to go.
Well, it's even
when you're not working, you can say what you want, but as long as you end up representing in some sense my company, even on your private time, if you're doing it in public, it's just like if you were to take drugs in public, maybe you're clean when you go to the office, but if you get arrested for taking drugs, you're gone.
Yeah,
No.
so it's even worse than that though, Sterling, because like if I own a hospital system or I'm the principal of a school or something, I want to know if I have employees who are saying that conservatives deserve to die, because I don't trust those teachers to watch over my students then or my kids. And I certainly don't trust a doctor who says that kind of stuff to
Right.
yeah,
And
nursing staff. That's got to go. You cannot work in those industries and have those opinions. You can't. You absolutely cannot get away with that.
Look, there's
a perfect example this week of this kind of thing happening with MSNBC, and the commentator Dowd basically said that those kinds of things about Charlie Kirk, that he deserved it basically. And to MSNBC's credit, and I never thought I would see the day, they booted his butt out the door within a few minutes of that. I mean, boom, gone. They finally are getting it over there. And that's what needs to be done all over the place. There needs to be consequences for this sort of hate speech.
And, just this week, you got members of the Secret Service and the military saying things like this. There are Secret Service members who have trashed Trump and said they would not defend him. Their whole job, their job is to defend the president if that's the assignment they get. This lady said no. And what they did when that happened is they put her on 2-year paid administrative leave until she reached retirement. No, she should have lost her retirement. She should have been fired right then. Because she basically said, I won't do my job if you assign me to this job. Now there's one that has said the same thing about Charlie Kirk. And if the government wants you defending Charlie Kirk, if the government wants you finding evildoers that went after Charlie Kirk, that's not your decision. And if you can't be trusted to do that as part of your fundamental job, you're gone. You're not put on administrative leave, or you're still collecting a paycheck. And yet that's what's happening. They get a paid vacation.
Yep. So thank you, Redneck Skrillers. All right. So we have, I think the rest of these are pretty much climate questions. So Albert says, I have a very sciencey question regarding the current stratospheric warming in Antarctica that could have a ripple effect globally on the jet stream. Is this possible? Anthony?
Well, I'm going to definitively answer that with yes, no, and maybe. I simply don't know.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, like we've said a lot, this stuff is complicated. There's a lot of research that points in different directions on each of these elements that you've listed here. So
Judith Curry said it best, that climate is a wicked problem.
Absolutely. All righty.
And even, you know what, even if because I don't know what's going on in the stratosphere in the Antarctica, but even let's say if it's warming and it might have a ripple effect, knowing whether that has anything to do with human greenhouse gas emissions is an entirely separate question.
Yeah, I think it's safe to say that stratospheric warming is up in the air.
First time I've laughed since Wednesday.
Yeah. Nuts and Bolts says, are these academics getting taxpayer funding for inventing this kind of nonsense? And that, I think, had to do with some of the topics at the top of the show.
They almost certainly are. You know, there's no university in the United States, and probably not in other countries, where research grants aren't coming from the federal government, their governments, respective governments, to universities to do research. There's corporate donors as well, but, you know, like I said, I think I brought it up last week, but maybe I didn't. You know, Eisenhower warned about this in his his farewell address. He warned about two things: the military-industrial complex, which everyone remembers, and the scientific elite at federal and government complex, in which big government, through its funding, captures the scientific elite and sort of ends up directing their funding, directing their research, and the scientific elite ends up capturing part of the federal government by weeding themselves into agencies. And so research that expands the government's role in the economy gets funded, and research that would tend to shrink the government's role in the economy and reduce the influence of academics doesn't get funded.
All right. Above Us Only Sky says, as heat moves from the tropics to the poles, is there any evidence of abnormally increased temperatures in the tropics?
No. In fact, the tropics are very self-regulating. Willis Echenbach on What's Up With That has dealt with this regularly. The intertropical convergence zone is a band of clouds all around the equator that breathes on a daily basis. You know, what happens is that sunlight starts speeding down in the morning. It heats up the air and the water. Air rises, turns into thunderstorms. The thunderstorms do two things. They transport heat up into the upper atmosphere, and then they also act as a reflection. The high, bright clouds reflect more sunlight back into space. And so they act as an automatic thermostat for the equator. So no, there's no evidence of abnormally increased temperatures there.
Great answer. Okay, let's see. All right, we've got a couple of questions here from our friend Luke, who has been quite active in the comments today because of our energy topic. Luke says, can you please tell me where my comments are bunk? I have to go looking for them, Luke. Hang on. I'll pull your other question, which is, why don't you believe what's widely said about the truth behind UK's high electricity prices? And let me go find what those were.
Well, one of his comments was natural gas being the most expensive form of energy, more expensive than wind and solar. And I guess, Luke, why we suggest that your comments are nonsense is because we look at data, and data shows natural gas isn't the most expensive form of energy. Data from the U.S. Energy Administration doesn't show that. Data from the states' electric power, respective electric powers, and the way they've gone up and where they've gone up the fastest doesn't show that natural gas is the problem. Wind and solar are the problem. They may be free for 2 hours a day, 3 days of the week, but they're drawing on fossil fuels or nuclear the rest of that time to regulate them, to supplement them, to replace them at a moment's notice. And that cost should be charged to the renewables.
Yeah, I would say that the view of the Heartland Institute on these sorts of things is pretty simple. Data rules, opinion rules. Just that simple.
Alrighty. And the fact that the UK's electricity market is set up in a particular way, I don't have very much experience with the UK's energy market in terms of how they set costs and stuff. I would say it seems very strange that they would set it to the most. Maybe one of our viewers here who lives there can tell us. In response to this, Jerry Palmer says natural gas here is taxed heavily and is loaded with green subsidies. That's why it's expensive. That could also be true.
Well, we know the wind and renewables get subsidies, tremendous subsidies, and that's not figured in. That supposedly reduces their costs. We in the States, we have a weird system here in the States. Until about 30 years ago, every state controlled its own electric power system. They determined, based on what was going to be reliable and what was going to be cost effective, they had to provide sufficient power. Almost every state had rules about providing a margin of power, so peak days we didn't run out, what it took to keep the grid going, and to take care of the ratepayers, to go with the least cost possible. And then the federal government got involved. That always improves things. They set up RTOs, regional transmission organizations. They said, oh, we're going to open up the wholesale market. There'll be trading between states. Except what they did is they captured states with low energy and had them ship energy to states with high energy costs. And they foisted green rules on the states with low energy. But still, it's a weird system because in the wholesale market, you bid in. In the wholesale market, when you bid, wind and solar always bid in very cheap. We can power very cheap, but they pay the wholesale market the highest bid, rather than saying, "Okay, we'll just get wind and solar. It's the cheapest. Let's see how it works." No. They pay the highest bid. Whatever coal comes in at, nuclear comes in at, gas. That's what wind and solar get paid. So they know, going in, I can bid zero, because I'm going to get whatever the highest bid is. So they reap windfall profits. It's a weird system.
Indeed.
It took the federal government to figure that system out.
Yeah. Mike O asks, if we get to net zero and it doesn't work, what will they do? Well, that's just the thing, Mike O. We will never get to net zero. Not for lack of trying on the part of the Greens, but because it's not something that's possible. And it's like that math kind of joke about a turtle approaching a wall, and every single day he halves the distance. He will never touch the wall because there is no half in which the answer after which you hit zero. So it's just an infinite approaching of the wall, and that's by design, I think, on net zero.
That's the design of a lot of these schemes. It's been that way for decades.
Yeah. So LT Oracle of Truth says, do you guys think we're going to have a late hurricane season? So far it's been quiet here in North Florida. We've been getting more in November than in August, September. It's been the case for the last couple of years that it tends to be a little bit later in the season. Anthony?
Well, this is all within historical norms. If you go back and look at the last 150 years of hurricane data, we've had late seasons before. This is nothing unusual. But, the moment some storms break out, which probably will be something on the order of maybe 2 weeks from now, you can bet that the left and the media is going to go berserko over the fact that climate change caused the season to be late and now more explosive hurricanes are hitting the coast. They'll find some way to weasel that in. They always do.
Yeah, there are. We can put it this way: there are dozens, if not hundreds, of different like major, I guess, effects or categories of activity and behavior for any given type of storm, right? Hurricanes, whatever. You are going to have periods of time where that behavior changes in some way. And so there will always be something to point at as, oh, this is changing. This is changing. They stopped saying that hurricanes are like dumping more water a couple of years ago because the data wasn't showing it. So now their thing is, well, now it's late season storms. Now that's the problem. So it's always going to be something, because it always is something, because weather changes.
Keep an eye out for this. Keep an eye out for this. So for 2 decades now, maybe longer, we've been told that climate change, because it's making the ocean water hotter, will cause more hurricanes. Now, back when I first started doing the climate change stuff, I said that doesn't make sense to me, because most hurricanes form around the tropics. The tropics are going to be least affected at the surface by temperature rise. That's going to happen at the poles, according to their models. Their models say this. And so the gradient between the tropics temperature and the seawater, ocean water, will become less. And storms, major storms, form where there's a larger gradient, where there's a cold hitting hot, not where hot and hot come together and they flatline. So now, and I said this 30 years ago, the hurricanes are like a heat pump. They work on the difference between temperatures. And now they've been saying for 2 decades, the hotter oceans will cause more hurricanes. There's a new study out. See if it gets any coverage that says, oh my gosh, we've just discovered hotter ocean temperatures will likely cause fewer hurricanes. I don't know if it's true, but I know that the physics of it seems to work that way. But this study, it would undermine, if it's right, if it's correct, it would undermine 3 decades of claims to the contrary. And you know what? I didn't see that in the New York Times. Now, I'll admit, we've all had a lot more to cover this week than we've had in the past. But this study, if it's true, is pretty important, because if climate change is making oceans hotter and it reduces hurricanes, that's another benefit of climate change, folks.
Yep. This is a good question from somebody over on Rumble who says, DJ Bo says, just how do they codify saying this or that storm is 17% stronger than it would have been without AGW? So that would be a question for Anthony. And just to set it up for the audience members who might not understand what's being asked here, practically every single time you see an article that says, Hurricane Harvey was impossible without human-caused climate change, or it was wetter without, it would have been less severe had it not been for, this is all based on what's called single event attribution studies, which can be produced very quickly and are not so great. They're not real evidence, they're not real science, but Anthony can explain that better.
Yeah, there's a thing called the Rapid Climate Attribution Group. And it's a bunch of academics who believe that, climate change is, going to destroy the planet. And basically they use some models. They sit down and they twiddle. Seriously, they twiddle with a model. And what happens if we do this? And then they come up with this answer. And they may run it a few times or more, and they don't get the answer they want. But when they finally tune it to get the answer, aha, there it is. 17%. We got it. Nail it. Let's send out a press release. That's why you see that stuff, and that's where it comes from.
Yeah, it's called World Weather Attribution, WWA.
Yeah, right.
And
right.
they put out rapid reports, which means they're not peer reviewed. They're not studious examinations. What they are is just what Anthony says. But more descriptive of it is they run what they call counterfactuals. They run a model that doesn't have any rise in CO2, and they say, what hurricanes would erupt from this model with no rise in CO2? As if we can look back and know what all the other factors might be, and they say, oh, well, it doesn't show very many hurricanes, or they're not very powerful if there's no CO2 addition. And then they run the model with different levels of CO2. And they say, well, based on the output, the outcome of this hurricane, we can say this is the emission scenario that matches it. And so this is 17% more likely because not based on data, not based on based on their model output of counterfactuals.
Yeah. You can think of a model like an audio synthesizer. You know, the people that use audio synthesizers in the music industry, you know, they sit there and they twiddle knobs and sliders and so forth to get this sort of a sound that they're looking for to fit into the song. And it's just like that with models. They're looking for a specific output, and so they twiddle. Another good example is, you know, like the sound effects that were in the original Star Trek. You know, they searched for all kinds of things, looking at different kinds of sounds, trying to make them sound like what they wanted to be, to convey, you know, a scary scene or a suspenseful scene. And that's what climate modeling in the rapid attribution people in the weather or WWA, that's what they're doing. They're tweaking these models to get the desired result so they can make a press release, because press releases are king. As soon as they spew that stuff out, the Associated Press picks it up and everybody else picks it up. And it's just like the old Joseph Goebbels thing. The more you say the lie, the more it's believed.
Well,
Right.
and the AP and the others don't exercise any journalistic investigative integrity. They publish it almost verbatim as if it's proven truth. But that tells you that what they're doing is not science. And why? They know, they've already predetermined climate change contributed to this, as opposed to discovering whether climate change contributed to something. We know climate change contributed. The only question is how much more likely was it, and how much more severe was it because of climate change? We know the answer, that climate change caused it. It's only a question of how much. And so they have the conclusion set out, and then it's just, as Anthony says, fiddling with the knobs till we get the most alarming outcome they can come up with.
Yeah, and the AP uses this on purpose. I mean, they heavily rely on attribution science. They are their number one fans, and it's interesting to watch because actually a lot of climate scientists, even more on the alarmist side, are starting to speak up and say, like, okay, the single event attribution stuff is kind of nonsense. Like, this isn't science. This is like just, programming a video game to tell you what you want it to say, and then saying, look, this is evidence of something. And I think some of it's starting to wreck some of their own studies. So because it's so ridiculous. And so everyone hates it now, and are slowly becoming willing to talk about it. We've gone quite a bit over. So I have a couple more sciencey questions that we're going to try to get to. Ian McMillan asks, in the Northern Hemisphere summer, the edges of the Arctic ice melt some. Are the alarmists just photographing normal summer ice breaks and blaming it on climate change? Sometimes, yeah. If it's like a newspaper article or something and it just has a picture of ice breakup or ice retreat from the coastline or something, then yeah, that's every single summer it does retreat, and sometimes quite a bit.
You got to remember, the sea ice up there is floating. One time they said, oh, it retreated. Why? Because we were up there and we saw no sea ice at all. Well, it had floated somewhere where they weren't, but they took lots of pictures. They take a picture of a single solitary dying polar bear, not accounting for the fact that, well, it's old. It has no teeth, so it can't eat meat anymore. So it's dying. And they say, oh, climate change is causing starvation. We have photographic evidence. In the end, what we know about sea ice since the satellite era, we only have sort of anecdotal evidence prior, is that sea ice dipped to a low during the summer of 2012. And the climate model said it was going to disappear. Oh my God, it disappeared even earlier than the climate model said. And then they stabilized despite billions of tons of CO2 being put into the atmosphere since 2012. The sea ice hasn't changed. The average sea ice hasn't changed much at all. That's not what the climate models predict. That's not what the alarmists have predicted. And sea ice isn't going worse. Now, The anecdotal evidence shows that sea ice was less probably in the past than it is now. That when they started measuring sea ice was a peak period, and we now may have reached a trough, but that doesn't mean it won't go back up.
Okay, well, we don't have much time, so I can only grab one more, you guys. I'm sorry, but I'm going to try to grab this one from Rumble because we don't get to enough Rumble questions a lot of the time. And this is from CCM591, who says, have there been any studies on the apparent lack of response in the rate of increase in ambient CO2 levels, I think he means decrease, during the COVID lockdown in 2020?
Yeah, Dr. Roy Spencer did a study on that during the right after the epidemic ended, and he found absolutely no change. I mean, there wasn't even a blip, which tends to, and the lockdown caused transportation to shut down, a lot of transportation to shut down, a lot of people not going to work. We had people not driving. We had a big shift in the way that we were doing our daily lives, and it didn't show up in the data. So that suggests that, these emissions in comparison to the whole scheme of things on the planet aren't much.
Yep. Well, I'll pass it back off to you there, Jim.
All right. Well, that will do it for today's edition of the Climate Realism Show. I want to thank everybody who was in the chat today, especially you, Luke Starkenberg. You don't agree with a lot of what we say here, I am sure, but you are here often in this to watch and comment on this program. And I also want to thank the others in the chat for always respectfully debating with him right here while we have the whole show going live. It's very special. And so, Luke, thank you for being here. We hope to see you again next week. I also want to thank our streaming partners, that being junkscience.com, CFACT, the CO2 Coalition, What's Up With That, and Heartland UK Europe. Remind everybody, you can always go to climaterealism.com, where we post at least 3 times a week, pushing back on the climate alarmist narrative in the mainstream legacy media. Go to climateataglance.com, where you can learn about a lot of the stuff we talk about on this program and how what's really going on with hurricanes and tornadoes and droughts and all of that stuff. That's climateataglance.com. And of course, always go to heartland.org, where you can subscribe to our Climate Change Weekly newsletter and maybe even help support the organization that brings this show to you every week. We will talk to you, hopefully, under even happier circumstances next Friday. Bye-bye.